Why silence is louder than words. Zen's secret. Have you ever sat in a moment so quiet, it almost felt deafening? A silence so thick, so present, that it swallowed every thought before it could form a sentence. That kind of silence isn't empty, it's full. It's a presence, a force, a kind of loudness that doesn't make a sound. And that's what this video is about. We're going to dive into the Zen secret that silence isn't the absence of communication, it's the deepest form of it, but more powerful than the most eloquent speech, more honest than any confession, more transformative than most actions. Silence, in the Zen tradition, is the language of reality itself. Let me give you a picture. Imagine a Zen master and a student sitting across from each other. The student asks, "What is the nature of enlightenment?" The master says nothing. The student waits. Still nothing. Minutes pass. Then, a bird chirps outside. The master points. The student is stunned into realization. But that's it. No explanation, no teaching. Just a finger pointing to a sound. But that moment, that silence, that was the answer. Because sometimes, silence contains more truth than 1,000 words ever could.
Click subscribe to this channel to get more profound insights.
We live in a culture so saturated with noise, literal and metaphorical, that we've forgotten how to hear anything that isn't loud. We trust volume over depth. We equate talking with understanding. We post, tweet, explain, argue. We fill every moment with content, commentary, and opinions. But Zen flips this on its head. It says, wait, stop, listen, and not just with your ears, but with your entire being. Because the truth you're chasing doesn't come after the words. It comes before them. In the stillness, or in the pause, in the space between. Have you ever noticed that the most profound moments in life often arrive in silence? The breath right before you fall in love, the quiet after someone leaves, the hush that follows a hard truth, and the pause before forgiveness. These aren't just empty gaps, they're sacred. They're the spaces where transformation happens. Zen masters knew this. That's why their teachings often aren't answers at all, they're disruptions. A sudden blow, a laugh, a stare, a complete silence. Because they're not trying to explain the truth, they're trying to show you that the truth is already here, beneath the noise you keep clinging to. And here's the twist: silence isn't passive. It's not just the lack of something, it's a presence that reveals everything. When you're truly silent, you're not shutting the world out. You're allowing it in. You're not numbing yourself, you're awakening. You begin to notice things you've missed for years. The sound of your own breath, the subtle tension in your shoulders, the way your thoughts rise and fall like waves. In silence, you don't become less, you become more aware, more alive, and that's frightening for most of us. Because silence doesn't just reveal the world, it reveals you. Without the noise, you're forced to face what you've been running from, your fears, your doubts, your illusions, your ego. That's why we resist silence. That's why we fill every blank space with noise. Because silence confronts us with the truth we've been avoiding. But we don't really know who we are, that we're scared, and that we're fragile, that we're constantly performing. But Zen says, good, let the silence strip all of that away. Because once you're empty, once you stop trying to be something, you finally become real. not in the way people think of you, but in the way existence knows you. So I want to ask you something, and I want you to really sit with it. When was the last time you were completely silent, not just outside, but inside? No rehearsing, no judging, no planning, but just awareness, just being. Can you even remember? And if not, why? What are you afraid you'll hear when the noise stops? This is the Zen secret. Silence doesn't hide the truth. It reveals it. Words slice the world into pieces, this true, that false, this good, that bad. But silence holds it all. It doesn't divide, but it includes. It doesn't argue, it accepts. It doesn't explain, it is. That's why Zen monks can sit for hours, days, sometimes years in silence. Because in that space, they're not trying to reach something, they're returning to what was always there. The pure, unfiltered presence of now. But we think we need more information, more answers, more clarity. But what we really need is less noise, less distraction, less self. Because underneath all of that is something deeper than understanding. It's direct experience, and that can only be met in silence. So here's a challenge. After this video, don't scroll to the next thing. Don't check your notifications. Don't go back to the noise. Just sit for 1 minute. Close your eyes. Breathe and listen. Not for anything in particular. Just listen. Let the silence speak. And ask yourself, not with words, but with awareness, what am I when I stop trying to be anything at all? The echo of emptiness, why words fail and silence heals. There's a strange moment that happens when you run out of things to say. Not because you're bored or uninterested, but because you realize that no matter how hard you try, words just don't reach deep enough. You're sitting with someone you love, or maybe someone who's in pain and you want to help. You want to say something wise, something comforting, something right. But everything feels small, inadequate, so you just sit there, quiet, present. And somehow that silence says more than any sentence ever could. That's the echo of emptiness. That's the healing power of silence. We've been conditioned to believe that healing happens through fixing, through solving, through talking it out. That if we can just find the right words, we can make the pain go away. But pain doesn't always need fixing. Sometimes it just needs space, and silence is that space. Not the cold silence of abandonment or avoidance, but the warm, open silence of presence, of being with, without judgment, without analysis, or without the need to make it better. Just being there, fully. That's where the healing starts. Think about the last time you were suffering. Not just a physical pain, but a deep ache, the kind that sits in your chest like a stone. Maybe you tried to explain it to someone. Maybe you stumbled over metaphors, trying to make it make sense. But maybe what you really needed wasn't advice or answers. Maybe you just needed someone to sit beside you, quietly, without trying to fix you. Someone who could hold space, not with their words, but with their presence. Did you ever get that? And if you did, didn't it feel like a kind of miracle? Zen understands this better than almost any tradition. It doesn't try to fill the world with more explanations. It's not obsessed with meaning. It's obsessed with directness, with truth beyond language. And that's why, when you study Zen koans, the strange, paradoxical riddles Zen masters give their students, they don't aim to make logical sense. They aim to break the mind, to push you past the point where words can help. Because only when the mind cracks open, when all your categories and beliefs and concepts collapse, can you feel what's beyond them. And what's beyond them is always silent. But don't mistake silence for emptiness in the nihilistic sense. Zen silence isn't a void, it's alive. It's brimming with presence, with awareness, with compassion. When a Zen master sits in silence, they're not tuning out the world, they're tuning into it so completely that there's no longer any separation. No longer a boundary between self and other, speaker and listener, healer and healed. Just presence, just reality. And in that space miracles happen. Not the kind that defy physics, the kind that dissolve suffering. Words fail because they create distance. They turn the infinite into the finite, and the fluid into the fixed, the mystery into definitions. But this isn't to say we should stop using language altogether, of course not. Language is beautiful, it's powerful. It's one of the most incredible tools we have. But we have to remember it's a tool, not the truth itself. It points, it gestures, it suggests. But it never is the thing. The map is not the territory. The word fire doesn't burn. The word love doesn't hold you. And the word truth isn't truth. At best, words are fingers pointing toward the moon, but too often we get caught staring at the finger. Zen wants you to look at the moon. So how do we live this? How do we bring this into the chaos of everyday life, where conversations are constant and silence is rare? It starts with awareness, with noticing the spaces between the words, with allowing yourself to pause, to breathe, and to not respond immediately, to sit with discomfort, but to realize that sometimes silence is the most honest answer you can give. Not as avoidance, but as reverence, as a recognition that this moment doesn't need to be explained. It needs to be felt. And this applies not just in conversation, but in how we relate to ourselves. We're constantly narrating our lives in our heads, analyzing, judging, planning, replaying. But what if, even for a few minutes a day, you stopped doing that? What if you sat in stillness not to achieve anything, but just to be? What would you hear in that quiet? What would rise to the surface once the commentary faded? Silence heals because it reconnects us to what's real. Not the story of your life, but the living experience of it. Not the idea of who you should be, but the undeniable fact of who you are, right now, breathing. It strips away illusion, not by attacking it, but by outlasting it. Like water wearing down stone. Like space holding every sound without clinging to any of them. Like love that doesn't demand to be spoken to be felt. So here's your question: what would happen if you stopped trying to say the right thing and simply became the right presence? What if your silence wasn't a gap in communication, but the deepest form of it? The language of the wind, how nature speaks in silence, stands still long enough in nature, and it starts speaking to you. Not in words, not in signs or symbols, but in something older than language, something felt, not thought. The rustling of leaves, the way the wind brushes past your face, the quiet rhythm of waves lapping against the shore, the sudden stillness before a storm, none of it says anything, and yet everything is spoken. We've forgotten how to listen to this language, not because it's gone silent, but because we've made ourselves deaf. We've replaced the subtle symphony of the natural world with the constant clamor of human intention. But Zen reminds us that Tao doesn't shout, it whispers, and only the quiet can hear it. Nature doesn't argue, it doesn't explain, it doesn't ask for your attention. It simply is. And in that isness lies a kind of wisdom we rarely recognize. A tree never tries to be anything other than a tree. It doesn't strive for growth, it grows. It doesn't resist winter, it rests. It doesn't cling to spring, it blossoms. No performance, no self-consciousness, just pure, unfiltered being. And in that being, there is peace. There is power. There is a kind of silent teaching that says, if you want to understand life, stop talking about it and start being it. This is why ancient Zen masters often retreated into the mountains, not to escape life, but to touch it more deeply, to immerse themselves in the great silence that holds all things. They didn't go to nature to get answers, they went to dissolve the questions. Because in the presence of the vastness of the sky, the solidity of stone, the endless cycle of death and rebirth in the forest, something inside you breaks open. Or maybe it falls away. That tight little knot of identity, that story of who you are and what you need and why you're not enough. The silence of nature doesn't argue with that story. It just doesn't believe it. And in that indifference, there's freedom. Have you ever watched an animal just sit? A cat in the sun, a bird on a branch, and a deer in the clearing. There's no striving in them, no narrative, no agenda, just alert presence, just now, and yet they're not empty. They're alive, bursting with intelligence, with awareness, with the kind of grace we rarely allow ourselves to feel. We mistake movement for meaning. But nature knows better. It teaches us that stillness often carries more life than motion ever could. The wind, for instance, doesn't need to announce itself. It arrives, it moves, it leaves, and yet, in its passing it shapes mountains, lifts seeds across continents, cools the fevered skin of the earth. Invisible, intangible, unstoppable. This is the language of the wind, a language without syllables, a message without grammar. But if you stand still, if you close your eyes and actually feel its presence, you understand it. Not with your mind, but with your being. And that's what Zen is always pointing to, direct experience. Not the description of the moment, but the living of it. So what does this mean for us, caught in the noise of modern life? It means we have to relearn how to listen, not just to others, but to the world, to the quiet signals all around us, to the mood of the sky, to the posture of a tree, to the silence in someone's eyes. Because reality isn't always loud, truth isn't always spoken. In fact, the deepest truths rarely are. They emerge like a slow sunrise, gradually, gently, inevitably, if we're patient enough to notice. Here's a question worth sitting with. How much of your life have you missed because you were too busy talking over it? Not just out loud, but in your head, narrating, analyzing, planning. What if the answers you're looking for aren't hiding in the next podcast or book or conversation, but in the breath of wind through an open window? What if the universe has been speaking to you all along, but you were too loud to hear it? The invitation is simple. Go outside. Leave your phone. Leave your thoughts. Sit. Breathe. Let the wind say what it's been trying to say, and just listen. The final word is silence. How letting go becomes the ultimate wisdom at the end of every journey, when the talking is done, when the questions have run dry, but when the mind is exhausted from trying to grasp, analyze, and define, what remains is silence. Not as a void, but as a return. A return to what was always there, underneath the noise, the striving, the fear. A return to the wisdom that doesn't announce itself with grand declarations, but waits patiently in the background, like the stillness at the center of a storm. This is the silent Zen speaks of the final word, not because nothing more can be said, but because nothing more needs to be. Letting go is the gate, and silence is what greets you on the other side. But letting go isn't passive. It's not giving up. It's giving in to the moment, to life, to what is. It's releasing the grip on the illusion that you can control everything, fix everything, know everything. And in that release, something incredible happens: clarity. Not the clarity of having all the answers, but the clarity of no longer needing them. You stop asking, "What's next?" and start seeing what's here. You stop chasing explanations and start living in alignment. And suddenly, everything begins to make a kind of sense, not the logical kind, but the kind that resonates deep in your bones. Have you ever noticed how the most profound people say very little? The wisest elders, the most grounded teachers, the most compassionate friends, they don't flood you with advice. They don't try to impress you with knowledge. Often they just listen, and when they do speak, it's with precision, intention, presence, because they've learned that silence is not something to escape, it's something to cultivate. They've stopped needing to fill every gap with sound, every question with certainty. They've made peace with not knowing, and in doing so, they've become vessels for a deeper kind of knowing, the kind that doesn't come from books, but from being. Zen teaches us this through paradox. The more you try to understand, the further you are from understanding. The more you speak about truth, the less you live it. The moment you stop grasping, it arrives. But why is that? Because what we're seeking isn't out there. It's not a concept. It's not a thing you can attain. It's presence, pure awareness, being. And you can't talk your way into being. You can only be. So when we let go of control, of identity, of the need to be right, we don't lose ourselves. We find what was always underneath the performance, the quiet self, the true self, the self that doesn't need to be named or validated because it simply is. This self doesn't live in the past or future. It lives here, right now, in the breath, in the pause, in the silence between heartbeats. And when you touch it even briefly, it changes the way you move through the world. You stop needing to prove yourself. You stop reacting to every insult, every challenge. You stop chasing perfection, because you understand the deepest power lies in stillness. The loudest truth lies in silence. The greatest wisdom is in knowing when to speak and when to simply hold space. So let me leave you with a final question. What would your life look like if you trusted silence more than noise? Not just external silence, but inner stillness. What decisions would you make if you waited for the quiet to speak first? What relationships would deepen if you stopped trying to be heard and started trying to hear? What part of you is waiting to be discovered not in the next word, but in the space after it? Maybe the final word really isn't a word. Maybe it's a breath, a pause, a presence. And maybe, just maybe, that silence is the voice of truth you've been waiting for all along.